So we know that Camp Half-Blood has been active for well over 3,000 years, and in that time they've seen their fair share of battles and conflicts. They've been through wars that have come with extensive casualties, many of which even surpassed the number of campers lost during the Battle of Manhattan. But there was one definitive point in Camp Half-Blood's past that nearly led to their complete extinction, and that is the night that we wanted to talk about today. And the insight into this fateful day can be found in the Camp Half-Blood Confidential companion novel, but we're going to dive much deeper into the details that the book doesn't outright confirm. The story is told through Chiron's perspective as he regales the reader with the complete history of Camp Half-Blood's beginning, how he was trained by Apollo in the field of medicine and archery, and how he began to teach demigods in the area these same skills as well. Eventually, he had an entire class of 6 demigods who resided in his cave in Mount Pelion, but we actually have a full video talking about Chiron's first class where you can meet the 6 demigods who founded the camp. So we definitely recommend that you check that video out too. After this initial class graduated, however, Chiron talks about how more and more demigods began finding their way to his doorstep in search of training. So eventually, he had to build an entire facility to house that many demigods, which led to the construction of the first big house. And that came with an open-air sword arena, dining hall, and archery range. And as the camp grew, so too did the roster of campers that Chiron was looking after. Eventually, they could no longer all be kept in the big house, since fights were breaking out, old rivalries between their parents were being passed down to the children, and they were just overall short on space. This is how the cabin system came to be, and Chiron allowed each family to create their own cabin in their own unique style, which is why they're so diverse. But this many half-bloods together draws attention. The reason why we need to understand this context is to give us some idea of how long camp has actually been active, since we seem to be at least a few generations removed from the initial class of graduates. But this is likely before the balance of power shifted to Rome, just based on how long-lived the Greek dominion was at this point in history. In the novella, Chiron outright admits that he knew this many half-bloods in one place would draw attention, but he believed that his training alone was enough to defend them against any threat that they might face. And for a while, he was right. They had intermittent monster attacks, but the senior campers were well equipped and perfectly able to fend off these isolated instances. But they did not predict an organized assault, and that's exactly what happened. Chiron tells of a day when Argus warned him that something was coming, and that night, Camp Half-Blood faced down an onslaught deliberately orchestrated by someone in the shadows. Though in all these years, Chiron has never been able to identify who collected this many monsters with one single objective. All he knows is that someone powerful lay siege to Camp Half-Blood by sending swarms of monsters surging into the camp and decimating everything in sight. The campers fought valiantly, using everything that they had and everything that they had learned, but even Chiron himself was forced to face the fact that they were seriously outnumbered, and it would only be a matter of time before camp was overrun. And he was right. If all had kept going as it was, camp would have been lost. But the only factor that ended up saving the remaining demigods was a legion of reinforcements that rode over the horizon at dawn. Word had gotten around that camp was in trouble, and every veteran who had graduated from Chiron's program rushed back to camp to help their old mentor. With a renewed vigor, campers old and new fought as one as the dawn broke, and Chiron says that this day blanketed the grounds with the collective dust of every monster that they had slain. The sun rose on a new day, and the camp was alive, but Chiron's pride had almost been their undoing. But there's still one burning question left at the end of the conflict. Why? To this day, no one knows who attacked the camp, but we believe we have a few educated guesses that are worth exploring. In order to break down who might be behind this, we have to understand who would benefit the most in a world without demigods. Who has the means, motive, and opportunity to amass an army large enough to lay siege to the camp? And who would carry out such a massive attack? Let's keep in mind that many monsters are intelligent enough to make their own decisions, and we see this quite often. The Impusae and Arachne that make up Luke's higher-ranking officers were all intelligent, and we know that the Latragonians, Cyclopes, the Manticore, and many, many others are smart enough to be compared to humans. It's only a few outliers like hellhounds, myrmidons, stymphalian birds, and a few others that are more animalistic in nature, and would need to be tamed or coerced. So we can look at humans, gods, demigods, anyone who had the ability to convince forces like Luke did. One particular monster that is worth considering as our prime suspect is Echidna, the mother of all monsters. In the Percy Jackson series, we know that even though the mother of all monsters is mostly an honorary title, she did sire more monsters than just about anyone else. And so most of the monsters and creatures in the Pantheon can be traced back to her. In The Lightning Thief, we know that Echidna enjoys letting her children practice on young demigods, and if she wants her children to thrive, then it makes sense that a world without demigods would be the ideal outcome for the mother of all monsters. She would allow her children to run wild, devouring every demigod in sight until they're finally dominant, since demigods and monsters have been locked in an eternal back and forth. Monsters continue to reform, and demigods continue to be born, and this is a point that deliberately is called out in the Chalice of the Gods, where Percy laments that no matter what he does, all of these monsters will keep returning. Even though he is saddened by the thought, he perks up when he realizes that, much like monsters, demigods are eternal as well. This means that if one side or the other wants to win, they need to choke off the return point, and for monsters, this would mean attacking the source of their training. Monsters might not be able to kill the gods, but they can stop their children from ever learning how to properly survive. Because remember, Camp Half-Blood is still in its early years, which means that monsters have just had their world turned upside down in the last few decades. At one point, they ran free, and demigods that they encountered either had individual backstories that provided some skills, or they were completely untrained and ready to be devoured. It's only when Camp Half-Blood showed up that demigods began fighting back, so suddenly, these monsters are being outclassed and outmatched. If they used to be on top of the world, and suddenly there's a new, more powerful legion of soldiers fighting them off, then it makes sense that they would want to launch a counterattack to stop demigods from ever being trained again. Therefore, if this is the case, then Echidna is certainly a viable candidate, since she's had to watch her children get killed over and over again since the dawn of Camp Half-Blood. Her children have been slaughtered far more often, so in our mind, she's probably the likeliest candidate for the creature who organized all of these monsters into one battalion. We know that Echidna has the means, motive, and opportunity to perpetuate such a crime, and we also know that in The Lightning Thief, Zeus has forbidden her from using her children to hunt demigods outside of a few rare instances. Even though Chiron might not know what really happened, Zeus very well may have, and this could be referring to some sort of punishment that Zeus enacted in order to prevent another attack. Since we know Zeus also has the motive to track down the culprit, and he's much more capable than Chiron. As soon as the attack happened, Chiron went to the gods and asked for a magical barrier to protect the grounds, and Zeus obliged since he knew why demigods were important. In the Trials of Apollo, Apollo confirms that the gods get their power from worship, and we've known for years that demigods can evade ancient rules that gods can't break, like stealing each other's property or instigating conflict with a higher being. Zeus understands why demigods are needed, and this is why he provided the barrier, but he also might have tracked down the source of the attack. Much of this is speculative, and it's just based on the evidence that we have and what we know about the universe. But based on our findings, this seems to be the theory that fits the best with given what we know. Since this dark day was mentioned in Camp Half-Blood Confidential, however, we're hopeful that eventually it might become relevant in the actual mainstream series. And perhaps we can get some more insight into this fateful night at some point or another. But that's the story of Camp Half-Blood's darkest hour and who we think instigated the near extinction of the Half-Bloods. But what do you think? Does this make sense, or is there another suspect that we should consider, and why? As always, we love this series, we love talking about this series, and we'd love to have you join in the comments down below. Take care, demigods, and we'll see you in the next one.